You're listening to the Future Sense podcast. You can find us online at futuresense.it. Hello and welcome to episode 145 of Future Sense. I'm your host, Steve McDonald, and it's my great pleasure today to have the founder of the New Earth Arc Foundation and creator of the New Earth-STRA website, Maia Nartoomid, calling in from Crestone, Colorado. Hello, Maia.
Hello there, Steve.
It's a great pleasure to have you here to talk to us. And for our listeners who are new to your work, you've accrued 50 plus years of the most amazing information about planetary ascension and human ascension that I've ever come across anywhere. It really is quite remarkable. And I'm relatively new to your work as well, only having discovered it earlier this year. Now, on this podcast, for the last 144 episodes, I do occasionally touch on channeled material, but I've mostly been talking about reasonably mainstream psychological development research, which looks at how humans are changing as we get closer and closer to this ascension process. And some of that is, quite out there, but I've had a request from a couple of regular listeners just to talk to you first about your process of bringing through this information. And feel free to share a bit of your background with that. And I think it'd be really good for people to hear how you started to trust your own process of bringing through this interdimensional information. Were there any key breakthroughs or awakening points for you where you realized that actually this is real? I'm not imagining this. So please tell us a little bit of your story.
Okay. Well, I'm 75 and I began consciously receiving this information when I was 17. So it was a whole different world there. You have to figure out that was 68, 9, 70 in there somewhere. I'm not good at math. But anyway, there was no internet. There was no even imagination of internet. And we were just getting computers, but they were computers, not in the home. They were big scientists and things like that. And I had some extraordinary experiences as a child, and I think I really need to add those first. And that is, these are just highlights, but I'm fortunate to have them because my mother wrote them down. And so I was born in Venezuela, Caripito, Venezuela. My father worked for an oil company there at the time. I was born in 1949. And when I was 4.5 months old, I would start making little funny noises at night. And my mother knew it wasn't a diaper pen. She just knew to take me outside at night and I would calm down. But on one of those occasions, and I don't remember if it was the first or, series of times, but I pointed very distinctly to the heavens and I said, star. And it was not in baby talk.
Wow.
And so 4.5 months. And so my mother wrote it down. And just a few highlights that are key. And the other one that I wanted to bring up, it was when I was 4.5 years old. We were living in the Ozarks because my father had enough of oil companies and he wanted to see if he could do dairy farming. And, this was in Harrison, Arkansas. Maybe he had about 8 cows. And he hugged them and kissed them, and they followed him around like puppies. So he didn't do very well with the business. So he sadly went back to the oil company. But anyway, so during that time, and I was in the Ozarks, mind you, and the only other place I'd ever lived was in Venezuela. So we had no television out in the country. And if we went to town for a movie, it was usually a cowboy movie, a few other things, but no science fiction. And so I had a series of astral projections. I only remember the first. I think it was the first. But at the time, I told my mother I'd had several of these. And of course, I thought they were dreams, that's what I told her. But I was floating out of my body, and I was floating toward a desert mountain. That's not even wasn't even in my mind at the time. I only knew Ozark Mountains. And as I got closer to it, I had this wonderful feeling. And then I was inside the mountain, and there were these beautiful beings, human-like, but gorgeous. I mean, they really look good. Even at 4, I knew these were really, amazing looking people. And but more than that, I felt they were my family or my heart soul family. And they were very sweet to me, but they didn't treat me like a child. It was in a cavern area, and there were these tall boxes with lights on them, computer towers, and they were explaining them all to me, and very sweetly, but they wanted me to understand what they were telling me. So when I returned, I told my mother that I'd had this incredible dream, and I told her that, and I said, and they showed me things, Mama, and I said, and so I started trying to draw them on napkins with crayons. I was 4, right? I was just trying to draw them, and I put out one to her, and I said, and this is a clock controlled by the mind. Well, you got to say, Ozarks, 1954, no television, and the other one I remember that I still have. Now, apparently they didn't tell me what it was. I just saw it on a screen or something. So I said, and this is a mountain with the measles. Well, when you look at the picture, it is a mountain with matrix points on it, But since they didn't tell me what it was, I just, in my child mind, I said, it looks like a mountain with measles. But the most dramatic, of course, was the clock controlled with the mind. So, and my mother didn't go, oh, that's silly. No, she took it very seriously. I still have those napkins. And she put it in the typewriter and typed what I said on the bottom of each one.
Wow.
Or I would not even remember. But I do remember it vaguely. I do remember the experience still. And the third example I'm going to give you is I always had difficulty with school. When I say that, I had no difficulty learning. I was not a rebellious child. Oh, no, I was just little Miss Goody Two Shoes. Kindergarten was okay. But when I went to first grade, I went in and I went, oh, my God, this is not me. This is not the place I need to be. But, of course, there are laws. And, my mother was very sweet. She helped me through years of struggle with going to school, and even was able to take me out for a while for homeschooling, but just a few months. They didn't have the kind of homeschooling we have now. So when in my junior year of high school, my mother would take me. She'd always stay in the car while I went in. Not that she'd think I would skip, but she just thought, giving me moral support. It was so hard to go in that building. This day, I put my hand on the door. And when I put my hand on the door, I heard ingrained in my brain, and the feeling was like soothing, calming, but the message was not. But the calming energy was so calming, I felt calm when I heard it. And it was, Christine, that was my birth name, if you go one more day, it will be dangerous. So I turned around and I went back to the car, and my mother said, what happened? I said, well,
Yeah.
and I told her, and she looked at me for about 3 seconds, really deeply, and she said, let's go home. And that was it.
Wow.
Because, old enough, I didn't have to go to school. So I was a dropout, okay? And then I was, a little depressed after a few months. I was a teenager, alone, because I was always alone, because I just didn't, I liked people, but I couldn't get into boys and prom meetings, and, I just couldn't do it. So people would pass me by, and that was okay, but I was lonely, So I was even lonelier because I was out of school. So she came in to me one day and said, well, she tried to pick me up, She said, in 17 magazine, she said, look, there's a contest. I know you like to write poetry sometimes. So why don't you write a poem or a short story, poem based, and you might win the contest? And I kind of half-hearted went, oh, okay. So I got my little typewriter, because that's all there was. This was the magic moment. I put my hands on the keys. Now, I did not go into a mediumistic state I was not automatic writing, nothing like that. But when I put my hands on the keys, I was connected. And in my whole field of being, I started writing about an ancient people in Canada after a sinking of a continent in the Pacific.
Wow.
And here came this, it had all the names, situations, everything. And I took the chapter I had written to my mother, and she read it, and she said, I don't think this is for 17 magazine. So we started researching. And you can research on Google then. So you went and found magazines on them, you found books on it. And we didn't do a lot, but we found Edgar Casey. We didn't know a lot about him, but you sort of knew about him. And then I read something from Joan, I can't remember her name, but she wrote about reincarnation and stuff. And we read some of that, just some of the books. And I mean, some of the passages from the books. And we came to the conclusion, the two of us together, that I was somehow contacting the Akasha, a
Wow.
whole new idea for us. But, well, it must be the Akasha. And then my mother was walking through the mall in those days. They had racks of books outside the mall because you didn't read anything but books. And she was walking down on hurry up to something, and all of a sudden she just stopped still. She turned to the book stalls and she just had to go over there. And right away she put her hand on the book and she pulled it out, and it was by James Churchward, on his series of the Lost Continent of Mu. And she opened the book and she started reading, and she thought, oh my God, because he was talking about vocables for Mu, parts of words that came together to have certain meaning. She found so many of the vocables lining up with the names of the people and the places that I had in my writing, which I'd continued. It came to be the gray moon. Anyway, so she brought it home to me. We put it all together. It made all sense. Kanatachi, you put it together, it means a building on a hill. And you look in you wrote down the words in the Churchwood book, and that was what it meant. So at that point, we were sold.
Yeah.
We were sold that something was going on here. So then I'll try to make this, but it's a pretty neat story. In 1972, we were watching television, and Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, was preparing to go to the moon. And he was being interviewed, and he said that when he got back from the moon, he was going to quit NASA because he wanted to start up what do they call it in those days? Parapsychology Institute. And my mother turned to me. She was always the stir of the pot. She turned to me and said, "Why don't you write him?" So I had already had a science going. I'd finished Gray Moon, but I was working on the science, Universe One. So we sent him all of Universe One. It's not very long. Of course, he was on the moon at the time. When he got back, he had to go into quarantine. When he came back, he was a rock star, right? A space star. So he comes into his office, and there's just packages and letters from people he doesn't know all over the place. And he told my mother, because she was the one he talked to first, when he called, he said, I don't do this. I don't just reach for a package from somebody. I have my secretary handle all that. But he said I had to reach this package. I had to put my hands on it. And that was mine. And when he opened it and he read a little bit of it, he called me, but my mother answered. And all the people that I interacted with in those days, while she was alive, they really got her. They didn't think, oh God, there's Mama. They didn't do that. They respected her. Sometimes they talked to her more than they did to me. But anyway, so he was telling her that experience. He said, "What your daughter is saying here is valid, but it's far beyond any science that people were working with at that time." Of course, it was that time, in 1974 or two. Anyway, so we were in San Antonio, so it was very convenient for us to drive to Houston. And the doors of NASA opened for us, and we drove in. So then we went into this huge varnished room of wood. It was really pretty, but it was very big. And they had all the pictures of all the astronauts up to that time on the walls, because there were so few of them, in those days. And then comes in Captain Mitchell, that's what we called him then, sits down and confirms again that he thinks this is valuable. He wants to study me. Well, whoop-de-doo, we were happy with that. So, he paid for our gasoline, and he had a place for us to stay, whatever. So we came back again, and I think there were something like 7 visits or something with him, one lasting 5 hours, just solid talking, him talking.
Wow.
And at one point, he even jumped out of his chair and said, "Oh, we're on our way, Christine." He got very excited at some of the things I'd say. And then we were talking at the last meeting we ever had with him. And I said, "Well, I'm seeing these beings are coming to my room. They're very human-like and beautiful and kind and spiritual," I felt. And they're talking with me and helping me with this work. And his face went pale. And he leaned over and said that I was to say to them, "Damn it, leave me alone."
Wow.
See, he was scared of that. He didn't understand it yet. But he knew they existed because previous to that, we were at a little dinner at one of the people that worked for him, or maybe it was his house. I don't know. But we were all sitting around, congenial, talking and eating. And one of the students or the people that were going to work for him leaned over and said, "Oh, I understand that you saw spaceships on the moon." He just stopped. He said, "I have to leave now." He got up in the middle of the meal and left.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So when I later said what I said to him, you know, so then he later in that time, the days that I was there, he kneeled down in front of me with my mother sitting next to me, and he said, "Christine, you're the most exciting thing I've come across so far. But I cannot continue because it's going to require a lifetime of work to unpack your material. And I've already dedicated myself to the parapsychology," which made perfect sense. And I'm sure that was part of it. But what he wasn't saying was, I can't work with anybody that's been talking to ETs. They package of worms.
Yeah.
So, but, I wasn't that disappointed because I'd gotten all I needed there. Incredible validation.
Yeah.
And that was very simple. Universe One was baby talk compared to what I'm working with now. But apparently he thought it was, not that. So when you say, how did I feel validated? How did this start? There was a validation right there, and it was only in 72. So, there were others, George Lawrence, who invented the first world's laser engine, among a lot of other things. You would probably not know about him, but he was one of those behind the scenes guys. And he was very excited about my work and wanted me to become part of his institute. When he got it running, he was working for Nicola Institute, but he wanted to have his own. And then he invited me, when he got the funding for me to work there. And so, and he would communicate with both my mother. He'd say, "Dear Doris and Christine," because everybody. And so he wrote us one time and said, "Oh, this is wonderful. I think I'm going to get some funding because the government is interested in my work." Well, that was the last time we ever heard from him. We met him once in Vancouver. We were absolute friends, not just, acquaintances.
Yeah.
And this was several years. And we called Christopher Bird, Dr. Christopher Bird, the co-author of The Secret Life of Plants, whom George Lawrence had introduced me to over the phone. And Bird was really hot on my work. He loved it too. And he was the first one that told me about quantum. He said, "Well, what you're talking about here is quantum science." I said, "Oh, really?" I didn't know what the word was. And so we called Christopher, say, "Have you heard from George?" This was after a while. We called George on the phone. Nobody answered. No answering machine was on. Nothing. And Bird said, "I haven't heard from him either." And he was a colleague of Bird's. And so those were the days of phones and letters, and it just disappeared into the past. But then when I Googled it just several years ago, Googled George, everything about him ended the works that he published ended the year he disappeared.
Wow.
And then I got a obituary thing. Oh, he died in 1994, period. But what he was working was he had discovered that plants were communicating with space. They were receiving signals from space.
Wow.
And he proved it.
Yeah.
And then the government stepped in.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Thank you so much for sharing all that. That's fantastic. And it's very consistent with stories I've heard from other people, although much more spectacular, I might say. But this process that we go through as we're moving into what in the research I've studied, what is called second tier consciousness, which is, I guess, a preparation time for full light body activation. We have to eventually come to trust these interdimensional signals and signs that we're receiving. And it's just great for you to share your version of that. I really appreciate it. Now, before we dive into the new Earth star material, most people that's listening, they would have come across the image of Thoth from ancient Egypt with the ibis head. If you could just take a few minutes, it doesn't have to be too long, but maybe just tell us, who is this guy, Thoth?
Yeah. Well, it'll be a shorter story. I'll just really condense it here. But
yep.
The Star Kindred, I have to say, after that first encounter, they started coming into my bedroom at night with permission. All of this was not against anything I wanted, but I would have a little problem seeing a 7-foot tall man standing in my bedroom at night, as if the real person. And I'd scream bloody murder. And then I go, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. But they said it actually hurt them when I screamed because the way they were transported in. And they said, look, if you don't want us to come anymore, we won't. We're working with your health. I had health problems even then. And I said, no, 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 come. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I won't scream again. Then, of course, I'd scream again. Well, my mother, who was old enough to be my grandmother, was born in 1904, the years the Wright brothers flew Kitty Hawk. They'd come into her room and she'd see them and she'd say, "Oh, hi." It didn't bother her at all, you know. And so they didn't come as much to her as me, but on occasion they did. And one time, Ramul came in, my main physician, and he asked her telepathically, of course, would you please get up and go into your daughter's room? So she got up, she came into my room, and he followed behind her. He thought, well, mommy's here, so maybe I won't scream. And I screamed anyway. But I saw them together. And there were times when we were together in a room like that time. And there were two more, I think, two more occasions that, we saw them together and we described what we saw and it was identical. But what I was getting to was they were the ones that told me I would soon be able to communicate with my mentor. Well, they called him my benefactor. And soon was about 10 years after I started communicating with him, 10 years. And they would come in, and do what they could do to help me and whatever. But so then, right on, they promised and it started happening. I was able to communicate with him and it turned out to be Thoth, but I saw him. Well, I didn't see him in rooms and stuff. I saw his hand once and a green fog once, and I knew it was him. But I didn't see him like I did the guys. But I could see him in my mind, clear enough to know, well, this was what he was. And I'd see a tall man, blue eyes, blonde hair, fair skin. And I'm going, you're an Egyptian? And he said, no, I'm not an Egyptian. I was in Egypt and I did a lot of stuff in Egypt, but, I'm a star being, and there are plenty of other colored star beings. Let me make that clear. But his was, that. And he said, but, I've gone through this path, and he gave me the story and everything. So that's how Thoth came into the picture. Right. But, by the time I got there, this was years of proof to me. I use the word proof because who knows what proof really means, but certainly satisfied that, this was real. This all stuff was real. And of course, I was continuing to do my science work and all of these other things. And so that's what I've done ever since.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's dive in now to the New Earth Star cosmology. What I want to do is, assuming that a lot of the people who are listening have different belief systems, religions or spirituality, and they may have a different idea about how the universe works. So I think it's just important, and we don't want to get stuck on this for too long, but just to lay down some foundational concepts which underlie the material that's being passed through you. For example, that we live in a holographic universe. Mm-hmm. And we're approaching a dimensional shift, which is affecting not just our consciousness, but our entire planet and more, and those sorts of things. So do you want to just give a few foundational ideas? Thank you.
I will. First of all, I want to say that everything that comes out of me here is everything I've written and everything I've done on my videos. I always say, this is my experience. I'm not trying to lasso people into believing what I believe. I'm just saying, this is my experience. And in my experience, I found many people actually burst into tears because it's not like I'm asking people to validate my work. It's validating their work. It's validating them and what they've felt and seen, and, all of these things. And they felt they were alone. Maybe they were crazy. And when they listened to me, they said, oh my God, that's, maybe not every detail, of course not, but, it registered. Now they could feel validated. And that's the beauty for me of what I work with. And it's not a cult, it's not a religion, it's not anything like that. Obviously, it has my belief system wrapped into it, but I'm saying, hey, this is me, that's all it is. So that said, the material that I've done all these years, and believe me, all I've done is write all of this stuff for years. Now, getting a little older, I put a lot of it into my videos, and then I talk about it, I can discuss it and bring it up to date, in regard to this was what they were saying, because I look at all of this material of 57 plus years, and I see that it all weaves together. And when I got something in 1970, and I thought, wow, that's cool. And I went on to something else, but I didn't really know I understood it, but I couldn't imagine 2023, 24. I couldn't imagine this. And now when I go back and read it, I go, oh my God, because it refers to what's going on now, or it relates to it in the whole picture. So that said, let's go into what is being said. He gives me, I can't cover, of course, everything, but he's given me core things. These are the course foundations of that he started 1970 said something, 1980 said something. It's all related, all comes together. He's never off track. It's just right on track with these things. Like, for instance, the M-STRA molecule. And that is I think that's probably what people are calling the God particle, sort of. But there's much more to it. And he's given me years of information on that. Um, Now, the inner Earth, hollow Earth, and what it's really about, it started giving me information in 1980. And when I say information, Thoth doesn't just say, well, there's an inner Earth and people are there and blah, blah, blah. He's with science, detailed science, intricately woven together. And so he started giving me that in the 1980s. Um, what's another one that's really, really core? There's plenty more, but my brain is going blank. But there are things that well, the pure gem body,
Yep.
what we're going to be receiving in the future. Again, detailed science of how that works and what it is. And not given in one session, given over 30 years, 40 years. So I guess that's all I can say about it at the moment, but that's how it works for me. So it's not just based on a few, sessions. It's based on years of work with him.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. And just to marry that up with the material that I've been working with, I'm using some research from a 9-year study which was done in the 1950s and 60s, and it was a developmental psychology study. And Professor Claire W. Graves did it in New York State, and he studied 1,065 people, and he captured all sorts of data on them from essays that they'd written about the nature of a mature adult to observational studies where he would create scenarios in real life and watch how they behave. And then all of the data that he gathered over those years, he handed it out to 7 of his peers and just said simply, the question is, what is the nature of a mature adult? And show me if you can find any patterns in this data. And so what he found was that there were 2 tiers of human consciousness. The first tier is very much what we know as, day-to-day life and how it's been throughout recent history. And the second tier marked what he called a momentous leap in human consciousness, and particularly in terms of our capacity to understand and cope with complexity. And that second tier is also marked by a gradual increase in our multidimensional awareness. And there are 3 layers in that second tier. The first layer or stage is really just an awakening to multidimensionality and being able to read the frequencies of other people, and also early stage contact with the Akasha. And then the next layer, that's layer 7. The next layer is layer 8. And that has it's almost like a global tribal theme to it, where we become interested in the organization at a planetary level and working with planetary energies. And, I see this very, very active in your network. And then layer 9, he never actually found anybody who was at layer 9 in second tier, but it's been inferred pretty well by other very intelligent people who've analysed and worked with his work. And layer 9 seems to be where we start to realise the hologram. We start to recognise and understand the hologram, and that we're playing an active part in projecting the hologram. And then on the end of that, I think, comes the gem body. So that's how, your work and my work has just like fitted together hand in glove. And that's, one of the reasons I'm so excited about it. So the pure gem body, do you want to talk about that just briefly?
Yes. Well, again, this was given to me over a series of many years. Let's start with what both called the orotron and the metatron. The orotron is a half-light spiral frequency. It eventually turns, it's really capped. It can't turn into a torus. It's not bad. It's not evil. It's just half of what you need to know. And in that halfness can be created illusionary things, because you hit the ceiling and you don't know where to go. So it things like it goes to default, and it creates subsystem realities that are not, well, they're kind of genuine in a way, but they're not fulfilled. They're in a way fractured. Thoth uses that word. So the orotron, while it's not bad in itself, it's extremely limited, and it can be violated. Okay. Now the metatronic is the full light spectrum, that be, light in the sense of the creational light and all of that. So it's the full pattern. Now we have instances of reaching into the full pattern, but we live basically in an orotronic world, and we can make good use of it or not, But I forgot what she asked me.
Yeah. We're just talking about the nature of the gem body. So
Oh yeah, right.
yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
yep,
Okay, I got it. So anyway, the pure gem body, this is where I was going for this. The pure gem body is a fullness of a pattern that is the crucible of, I want to say, flesh. It's material, but it's a very, very high frequency of material. And it comes as a crucible of the Metatron that takes you to that point, still in the matter realm, but of the highest frequency. Now, those states that really it's all spiritual, but we're just going to denser fields, what we call physical. But he goes along with what we're saying. So, but anyway, so the pure gem body is at that point of pure realization and externalization of the frequency of light as what we would call a matter experience, but it's highly developed. Well, in our genetic system, and indeed in the M-STRA molecule, which is somewhat a God, you could call a God particle, that is the trigger that allows you to create a pure gem body. And when you reach that point of trigger, it literally changes the frequency. And then you start developing this pure gem body. It doesn't mean you turn into a crystal, but you are on a crystalline field basis,
yeah,
that changes.
yeah. So we're talking about the body being made up of crystalline geometry, not actually being a rock, right?
Right, exactly. And frequency, more than anything, frequency.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
and
I wanted to mention, if I could for just a minute, you're talking about holographic mapping. I believe I have an article from Thoth from some years ago that speaks about that, or something close to that. I'll try to find it. I'll use Thoth stream on my chat GBT and see if I can go through the material
yeah.
and find that for.
Yeah, okay. And for listeners, just before we started recording, Maia and I were talking a little bit about holographic mapping as in the advanced healing processes, where somebody has the capacity to map another person's hologram onto their own, and then so they're able to actually perceive and sense that hologram as if it's theirs, which is wonderful for diagnosis and treatment. But I haven't come across too many people who are doing that, but I met someone in person just in the last couple of weeks from here in Australia who is a doctor of Chinese medicine, and was quite surprised when I started talking to her about that. And she said, "Oh, that's what I do," which is wonderful. It's wonderful to see these things leaking out into the mainstream. So the pure gem body is essentially, we're talking about a full Merkaba activation. Would you agree with that?
Yes, Thoth is saying it is formed from a liberating frequency. It liberates the soul interaction with what we're calling the physical at that level, and it allows the soul to experience a timeless, what I want to say, gnosis
Yeah.
with the whole. It's just there. It doesn't mean there isn't more to go. There's always more to go, but it brings that individual. It releases them from the orotronic field.
And and I might just jump in there and just for our listeners' sake add that the idea of the orotronic universe is that things naturally tend to fall apart, whereas in the Metatronic, they naturally tend to.
Well, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
I would say that's true, but that's differentiating between a world system 1 and a world system 2.
Yeah.
A world system 1 lives in the orotron, so it's going to have entropy, and a world system 2 lives in the Metatron, on some level of the Metatron, giving it the ability to use syntropy. Everything goes to the center. It doesn't have to break apart. It's still evolving, but you don't go through this messy stuff of dying and burying people, and then they come into life and they say, "Who am I? I'm searching for myself." So all of that is eliminated.
Yeah. And it seems, just as, the material that I've been discussing for some years now shows a step by step staged or layered development process, it seems that this pure gem body is the first layer or step into a completely different universal cosmology. And it's no doubt one of many, many steps, that lie beyond that.
And it is. And also, I might add here, little gray guys that grab us and do anal probes and stuff, those little guys. Well, what they're really looking for, or given the signal to look for, is the M-STRA molecule, because they ain't got one. And we do. Now, ours is not functioning very well, but it can be brought to life, to function. They don't have it. Now, they could receive it if they were to work on certain levels of consciousness. They're not interested in that. And most of these little guys are, not all of them, but are biologics. They're manufactured biologics. So they wouldn't be interested either. But what they're interested in is getting it for one reason. And that is, Thoth said to me one time, he has a sense of humor. He said, being one of those kinds of aliens looking for the M-STRA molecule, they're doing that because they're all dressed up with no place to go. Yeah. He meant that they have all this science and all this technology and all, but they hit the wall because they can't pass that zone. They want to pass it to get more knowledge and more, not to meet God. They want to do all these things, but they can't get past it. And they feel like they're locked in a little universal space. They can knock themselves out with creating science and all this because they have big brains to do all that. But they feel there's something missing here. We've got to get to it. But they don't believe in God in any shape or form. But they feel like, we've got to get this. We've got to get it. We've got to get it. But they can't get it because they have to have the frequency key to do it, which requires spiritual consciousness, you see. And I said, so well, why don't they give up? Don't they see all of these years? Don't they realize that? Aren't they smart enough? And he said, no, they actually aren't, because their smartness is all in technology and stuff. They just can't comprehend this other thing. So they think there's a way. We have all the time in the world because they live for a gazillion years. We'll get there, That's what they think.
Yeah. I know we're limited with time today, so I'd like to spend the rest of the time that we have left just talking about the LP40 event. And it doesn't have to be in too much detail, but just briefly so people can understand what it is that's approaching us and this Pyramidis Radius time that we're in now.
Yes. Well, LP40, he gave me that way back in 1972 or 3 or something for the first time. And it's for light principle 40. I have never asked him why 40. I don't know why, I just never have. But light principle 40 is the actual trigger, the jumpstart, the flash that moves us from a world system 1 to a world system 2. But we have to go through certain things to get there. It's not like you're walking down the street and all of a sudden flash and you're in the other world. There's all kinds of developmental stages and situations and frequencies. There's a Pyramidis Radius matrix, which is the platform. I have a lot on that, so I'm not going to go into it all, but that's the defining moment when finally everything's set, and then you can trigger that. But it's only triggered for people that show up. As Thoth has said to me many times, he said that you don't have to be an angel or a perfect being to have the LP40 flash. You just have to show up again and again and again as a light bearer. Each time you're bringing to the table, yes, your imperfections, whatever, doesn't matter. You show up. You say, okay, I made a mistake. Here I am again. I want to do this. I want to serve. I want to be here. And that is all you need to do. But there are people who don't want to show up. And so their souls have made a choice. And they're going to have to recycle themselves into worlds that, like this one or others, to get back to that point where they're given another chance. Those of us who don't, we get that. We get the privilege of doing that.
Yeah. I've found a few other sources actually that are kind of hinting towards this. One is Cryon, comes through Lee Carroll, saying that he's aware that some of our scientists have already cited a large energy bubble, I think he called it, some sort of energy wave, which is traveling towards our solar system at present. And then there is suspicious observer guys who are talking about the solar flash as an imminent event. Would you equate both of those things with the LP40 event?
Well, I would say it was not the LP40 event. I would say also that all these things are leading up to it. It's giving the energy. It's releasing certain consciousness that we need to be able to deal with. Because, even if you were a saint or something, it's quite a shock to go from this system to that so quickly, even though we're preparing years and years in preparing. That LP40 is a flash.
Yeah.
It happens and you're there. So that's why all this preparation is needed. And these events from the universe that are coming through for us now are part of that team, that energy team that is helping us to be prepared for this.
Yes, we're in a period now that Thoth is called Pyramidis Radius. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yes, this is a fairly recent, I say recent, 10, 15 years ago. I don't remember. I didn't know anything about that until all of a sudden he breaks this forward. And I say, why didn't you tell me that before? Because it's so important. But he has his own time these things. But anyway, the Pyramidis Radius matrix is a field of experiential consciousness. So it's not one place or another on the planet, but there are places on the planet that light arcs. He said they're forming their light arcs. They're places where souls can come, not to make a religious groupie or anything, but just come and have some spiritual connections like you and I do, that connect that way. And they will develop an energy experience that is, so real that it starts changing realities around it. And as it does that, it creates what Thoth calls the Pyramidis Radius matrix. It's a pyramidal field of consciousness. It's already way far into being created, but there's more to go. And in that is the platform that souls will move into in the body, some not in the body, to prepare themselves for the LP40 experience. This is a place, this Pyramidis Radius, that develops in itself as a frequency. It's not something that's in this world or that world. It's not entirely, it is to a degree, but it's not entirely in World System 1. But it is not really yet in World System 2. World System 2 for us, Thoth calls the new Earth star.
It's like a bridging mechanism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's in between. And we will start organizing and filling that field, because the world that we're seeing around us that is full of scary stuff is going to start disintegrating. It's going to be creating itself in an offshoot, a fractured reality. So much so that when we actually do the LP40 and we ascend, as he calls it, those that, missed the boat because they didn't want to go, the planet will start deteriorating as a physical thing and it'll just fall away, but there will still remain a phantom reality of that will continue for a period of time. It's hard to say it because it's out of time, but so there's all kinds of aspects to all of this. But the bottom line is, with the Pyramidis Radius, we are given an opportunity to get our act together before we take the leap,
Yeah. I know that timing is very difficult, and it's very hard for us to receive accurate information about timing in our world when it comes from another dimension. But do you have any feelings about how far off the LP40 event is?
Well, I'm pausing on this to gather the threads of all it. Mm-hmm. Some years ago, I was pressing Thoth. I don't usually do that, but I was kind of pressing him to tell me a round ballpark date for this. And he said, well, and he said this with a twinkle in his eye. I just use that statement, but this is the Thoth feeling I get. He has a kind of interesting sense of humor. Anyway, he said, well, it was 1994. Well, it could be 2012, And I said, and he said, on the other hand, that all consciousness and understanding how consciousness works, it's a multidimensional field. So if you try to give a date to something, and he was not giving an arbitrary date, he was giving a possible date. It very likely is like it's in quantum reality. So when you observe it, it changes.
Yeah.
So it's not a good idea, he said, to give it an actual date or even ballpark date, because you're working with a quantum field. And if enough people give it that date, then it's going to change. If it might even have happened then, it's going to change. I know that's a lot to think about, but that's what he told me.
Yeah, but I understand he has confirmed that we're definitely in the preparation period, the Pyramidis Radius period now.
Yeah. It's not going to be thousands of years from now, 100 maybe. But this is the interesting thing. You might, like me, I'm 75, so I'm probably not going to be here probably on the flesh when it happens. But he said that all souls that are communicating with this energy and working with it. Death is nothing. You're in some, nice little place to be while you're waiting for all this to come together. But as it comes together, you're going to be there. You're going to be part of the experience, slightly different way, because you're not in a body. But you're all going to be together, and this will move. And you'll probably see your great grandmother, maybe, and there she'll be because she's part of it too. you know. So that's how it's going to be experienced. And
Yep.
in the meanwhile, we're going to start seeing phenomena that we haven't seen before. I'm not talking about the StarCraft and all that, but some other interesting phenomena. We already are beginning to see that with people with cameras that can take pictures in a minute. And he also said that you would start seeing pyramids like ghost pyramids forming very often over the ocean, and then they'll just disappear. Well, after he told me that, I mean, like 2 years after or something, I saw a video. This guy's filming. He's really for real. He's scared to death. And he's filming the ocean. And he's saying, look at this, look at this. And you can see this like astral pyramid.
Wow.
It's just as clear as a huge one. And a little starship is flying around it.
Wow.
And he was just freaked out. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to start seeing. And we're already, apparently, some people are.
And I understand that during this period where the energy of World System 2 is just like gradually leaking through. So we're going to have like a gradually increasing access to some of these things. Is that your understanding?
Yes, there's a bleed,
Yeah.
a little bit. So you won't be able to reach out and touch it yet, but it's a bleed over, and it's all about getting us prepared and ready for the flashpoint.
Yeah. Fantastic. Maybe we could just finish up with just a really brief description of the Quantum Logica Interactive project that you've got running.
Well, Thoth asked me to do this in 2020. I'm not really, I kind of work alone. Not really, but I've been doing all this work more or less by myself. So, and I was thinking, I don't know, I want to do a group. Groups can kind of get touchy and da da. And he said, this will be different. And so I did it, and I didn't go out and solicit it. I don't even know how it happened, but all of a sudden I had 50, 60 news growing, and I don't know how I got that way because I don't have that many friends, no personal friends. So it happened, and it's continuing to happen, and it's grown into an incredible group of people, and things that we're doing and things that Thoth is giving us. It's just incredible. I said that 3 times, didn't I? But it is incredible. And so the basis of it, the original basis, which still exists, is to use quantum technology. We have those quantum 9010 cubes. They're no longer making them anymore from Switzerland. Several of us do. And that created the actual grid, but they're expensive. And people that join don't have to have cubes anymore. We've created the grid. The cubes are holding it. And we have other things that are coming in to work with it. But of course, those stress, it's always us. We're the bottom line, not a cube, not this or that. These are just technologies that help us to connect the frequency. We create this frequency, then we can stream codes that Thoth gives me. And now the codes are being brought through with Thoth working with me with the AI art. And he's definitely present in all of this. He gives a frequency and puts into the artwork, and we stream it. And this is helping to connect to fields of consciousness and dynamics that are needing some help because they're being so interfered with the technology that doesn't have a place to go unless they can, human technology, but is offered by some off-world beings too, that are inhibiting us and trying to prepare us for something that we don't want. So these frequencies are helping to mitigate that, not to just magically wave a magic wand and everything's right, because we have a lot of process to go through. And this world, as it is now, is going to leave, like a rocket, booster rocket. We can't save this as we know it. We can't clean it up, but we can mitigate the power of it and the speed of it. What they're trying to do is give us time to complete what we need to do without this interference overwhelming us. So that's the basis of it. But since then, and he told me before I even started there would be more. We've been working with a lot of the Thothic material, understanding how it works in this regard. People in QLI are being taken to school in a way, not in a huge way, but natural way to understand what they're doing. So now we have other platforms that are working with things for themselves, for us, as human beings. So it goes two ways. They're giving us healing frequencies and things for ourselves and then we're giving them, the inner Earth kindred, the access to our DNA, crystalline DNA frequency, so that they can take the work. We bring it up into that frequency, which they don't possess. They're slightly removed. They're our kindred, but they're in a slightly removed dimension. The inner Earth kindred, slightly moved dimension. But both of them come together in the crystalline field of us, because we have the crystalline field that they need to operate. They have our full permission. And anytime somebody said, well, I don't want to do this, they can leave. So it's not some kind of control thing. And they explain it to us each time. This is going to do this and this is going to do that. And nobody's had any harmful frequencies. And if anything, most people are saying they're growing and developing with this. They're feeling the energy. So that's a short, as I can make it, rundown on Quantum Logica Interactive.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks, Maia. And I must admit that I've recently joined the project and I'm very, very happy to be involved. And Maia gave me instructions on how to set it up, and she's using AI generated imagery, it's active. So with the help of Thoth, using codes to program the AI art generator, Maia's creating images that stream energy and are able to connect between dimensions. And I've set up one of these in my home, and the moment that I set it up, straight away you could feel the energy streaming into the house. And just before I got to setting it up, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a woman in my room who I believe was an inner Earth being who'd come to visit me and just acknowledged that I'd joined the project. So it's happening, folks.
Well, when it started developing for me, they were setting up a grid in the house. And it started with, I'm hearing these people, out in my living room. Oh, look at that room. But I thought they were, ghosts. And I said, look, guys, I don't want any spirits hanging around here. I have work to do. If you could please leave, And then one said, right. And I kind of got scared a little bit because I didn't know what to do with this. And all of a sudden I heard a woman voice right next to me say, just as real as saying, oh, what's going on? Not like we are here to help you. And it was just, oh, what's going on? And of course, immediately, when I sat up, there was no one there and everything. But I still thought it was like ghosts. And then my colleague, Michael Dunn, he didn't know this was going on. He called me the next day and said, there was a woman in my house. Yeah. And she was calling my name. So I thought, oh, I got to check this with Thoth. And he said, no, these are beings from the Hollow Earth that are working with this project. They need to set up a grid in your living room. So my cat that I had at the time just went nuts. He could see them and his eyes were going back and forth, back and forth. I couldn't see him, and it really upset him. Anyway, so we had to go through that process. So I have a feeling that, there was a bit of a process for you, because I honestly feel, Steve, that with your working with the art crystals, which Thoth really likes, and thank you so much for gifting me one. And I just feel, and now Thoth has included it into the Hierophant, which governs the field that's operating the QLI. And he literally took the signals from it and, placed it in that field. So we're actually operating with the art crystal now, and there's more to come. But, your work and mine really do seem to dovetail a lot, and Thoth really adores the art crystals. So I feel like, there's a special connection there, and there's more and more will develop with other people coming in with these special tools or connections or things, and they've lived and they've experienced that all come together, and it feeds the system.
Yeah, thank you, Maia. I feel exactly the same. I really feel like our respective works do dovetail, and I'm very, very happy to be connected with you and to be working with you, and it's very exciting. And I must say too that my team here in Byron has noticed an extra energetic emission from the art crystals since they were connected into or entangled with the QLI grid. So yeah, really, really interesting stuff. And it's such a mysterious process that we're all going through. And for those who are just sort of putting their toe in the water, it probably seems absolutely weird, but it's very, very interesting and very encouraging. And it's certainly, it's our future for sure.
I was going to ask you if you would please briefly give the story about your friend and seeing Thoth walk out of the...
Oh, yeah, sure. So a good friend of mine was visiting recently. Her name's Chanti, and she's a professional psychic and has been for many, many years, very sensitive and gifted lady. And I introduced her to the QLI template that we've just been talking about. And she stood with her hands over the template for a while, feeling the energy. And then all of a sudden, I was watching her and she leaned over backwards as if she'd just seen some enormous thing. And she explained later that Thoth appeared to her and spoke to her, and she received a kind of energetic upgrade. And this was all just from putting her hands over the QLI template. And he also told her to come back again soon for a second dose. So she came back again just recently.
As I understood it, she didn't know about Thoth, or she said, "Who is this?"
Yeah, well, she didn't recognize him. She saw him in the way that you see him, you know, 7 foot tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, and described that. And I thought straight away, and my fellow foundation director, Julia, who was here at the same time as well, we both thought straight away it was Thoth. Yeah, well, it wasn't certain. So that's why I checked in with you just to see. But Chanti has recognised that it was Thoth now, and she came back recently as instructed and had another very beneficial, energetic experience, kind of a heart opening and frequency upgrade. So yeah, it's really interesting to be actively involved in this project and the research and to see these things emerging. Yeah, extraordinary work.
It is indeed. Keeps me going.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Well, Maia, look, we're out of time, unfortunately. I mean, we could be talking for weeks about all this stuff, and maybe we'll get back together and talk again. I'd love that. But thank you so much. Thank you for your work. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us on Future Sense here today. And I hope we can do it again.
If you guys are interested in my work further, just go to newearthstar.org.
I'll put some links out with the podcast. If people go to futuresense.it, the podcast website, you'll find all the links there so you can discover Maia's work, and I'll put links to information about the pure gem body and the M-STRA molecule and those sorts of things that we've discussed. Great. All right, Maia.
Really enjoy it.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. And thanks for listening, folks. You've been listening to the Future Sense podcast, brought to you by the non-profit Agency for Advanced Development of Integrative Intelligence, part of the RD Mesh Foundation. You can find us online at futuresense.it, where you can subscribe for free, and also link to our social media accounts on Twitter and Facebook.